Hello there, this is Kanji. Today I want to talk about your first Fujifilm travel lens. So if you are new to Fujifilm, welcome. There's so many great things to talk about. There are many Fujifilm travel lenses to discuss. So let's get started. First of all, Fujifilm has two series. They have their XC, which is their budget series, and XF, which is their higher end, higher quality series. The XF is going to have metal body, also better image stabilization. Usually they are sharper as well. But we're going to start with the XC series. So let's start out with my favorite travel lens for its size, and that's the 15 to 45 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 aperture lens. Now this lens is unique because it's extremely light. It's only 2 inches long. It's pretty sharp. And what kind of separates it from the other ones in general is when you're at 15 millimeters, you can focus super close on subjects, which is great for flower photography, small objects, etc. Pricing used, you're looking around $200 right now in 2023. So this is a bargain to be able to focus close and zoom out really far, which is the 15 millimeter. That's what that means. Zoom in pretty good, a little bit, good enough for portraits at 45 millimeter. That's nice. Now let's talk about aperture real quick. So I said this is f3.5 to 5.6. For those of you that don't know what that means, the lower the number, the more light can come into the lens, and also the lower the number, you'll get more background blur and foreground blur. So when you're focused on something, anything behind it will look more out of focus and look more three-dimensional. And also if there's anything in front of what you're focused on, will also look more out of focus. So for landscapes, you want to use a higher aperture number, usually f8 to f11. And then for portraits, you probably want to use the lowest aperture if you want to blur out the background. So why are there two numbers in the description for this lens, the f3.5 to 5.6? Well, what that means is when you're zoomed out at 15 millimeter, it's going to be 3.5 aperture. If you zoom in all the way to 45 millimeter, the largest aperture you can get is 5.6. So if you're doing indoor photography, you know that means that you want to zoom out all the way to 15 millimeter to let more light in, and that will give you higher quality images. Alright, so next I want to talk about my favorite all-around travel lens. It's not the lightest, it's not the smallest, but in my opinion it's one of the most versatile. It is the 16 to 80 millimeter f4. So notice I mention only one aperture number, f4. What that means is no matter if I'm zoomed out or zoomed in all the way, the aperture, if I want it to, will always stay at f4. And f4 is a decent aperture size. It'll let in a decent amount of light. It's not phenomenal, but it's good. So 16 to 80 means you can zoom out really wide, but 80 millimeter means I can zoom in quite far. So that's why it's one of my favorite versatile travel lenses. Another great benefit to the 16 to 80 is it has amazing image stabilization. So what that's good for is if you're in low light situations, the shutter speed has to slow down on your camera, and so you might get some motion blur or shaky pictures, in other words. So with good image stabilization, you can reduce or eliminate that. And I'm happy to say this lens has probably one of the best image stabilization out there for Fuji. It's what they call 6 stops of image stabilization, which is excellent. Most have 3. Another time when image stabilization is important is when you're zoomed in. The more you zoom in, the harder it is to get a steady shot. So, yeah, I mean, 6 stops is excellent. Another reason why this is one of my favorite versatile lenses is, once again, you can focus very, very closely, which is great for, again, small objects, similar to what I said about the 15 to 45. But it is quite a bit bigger and heavier than the 15 to 45. But you get almost double the zoom in range. And another benefit to this model is it is weather resistant. So if you do have light rain coming down and you're hiking, and you also happen to have a weather resistant Fujifilm camera body, your equipment will be better protected. Now, like I said, f4 aperture is good. It's not phenomenal. However, some of you may not know this, but the more you can zoom in, so 80 millimeters is pretty good zoomed in, and the closer you can focus to your subjects, the more background and foreground blur you will get. It's that professional look that a lot of people are looking for. And like I said, this lens can do that. It can focus super closely. So because it has both close focusing and you can zoom in pretty well, the background blur looks like you're using a bigger aperture. So this is really a pro lens. I've used it for pro work, and you guys won't be disappointed in it. And it's about medium weight, medium size. Okay, so next I want to talk about telephoto lenses. Telephoto lenses means you can zoom in much farther than the average lens. My favorite telephoto lens that I own is the 55 to 200 millimeter f3.5 to 4.7. And what is great about this lens is the aperture on this is lower, larger than your average telephoto lens. So it lets more light in, and more light, what that allows you to do is get a faster shutter speed, and faster shutter speed freezes action. But like I said earlier, lower aperture numbers also increase foreground and background blur. So having a 3.5 to 4.7 aperture on that lens is great. Most telephoto lenses have an aperture of f4 or 4.5 to 5.6. Okay, now also the glass on this lens tends to be a little bit sharper than other telephoto lenses. They have some special lenses in there, and special glass that makes it a little bit sharper. So this lens you're looking at probably $450 to $550 used. If you want the budget version of this, they do make a 50 to 230 millimeter, but the aperture size is not that great. I believe it's 4.5 instead of a 3.5 to 6.7 instead of 4.7. So again, the lower the number, the more light it lets in. 6.7 is not great, but you do get more range on it. It's about half the price. So, and it is, I hear, I mean, I've used it a few times. I haven't fully tested it, but from what I've read, it's still pretty sharp. It's not going to be as sharp as the 55 to 200. Okay, so there are two other travel lenses that I want to talk about that are affordable. There is one of the oldest lenses, which is the 16 to 50 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6. They're under $200. They're pretty sharp. I have compared it to the 15 to 45 and also the 16 to 80. I've zoomed in and looked at the image quality all around several times, and it is noticeably softer. It's not as sharp. Also, the image stabilization is rated at 2.5 stops, which is okay, not good, but okay. But it's really cheap, but it is a good focal range. I mean, 16 to 50 is usable. Can focus kind of close, not great, but it's if you're really penny pinching, then go grab one. But for about the same price, I would probably get the 15 to 45. Better image stabilization, sharper, closer focusing. Lastly, I want to talk about the 18 to 55 millimeter f2.8 to 4. This is an extremely versatile lens as well. I sold mine because I do lots of landscape, so I like a wider lens. 18 millimeters is not wide enough for me. It might be for you. But let's look at this aperture for a second. So I said f2.8 to 4. So that means at 18 millimeter, you're going to get a 2.8 aperture, which lets in a lot of light. It is good for low light. Not phenomenal, but good. Better than average. When you're zoomed in, you get an aperture f4, which is pretty good. This lens is made of all metal. It's an XF lens, which again I said is the higher end series. It's older. It does have decent image stabilization. It's 3 stops. The only thing I don't like about it, like I said, is you can't zoom out very wide. Also, you cannot focus that closely. So those are two things that are important to me. Maybe they are not important to you, but it's something to consider. This is a quite sharp lens. Therefore, because it's an XF and sharp and has a good aperture, it is going to be more pricey than others. The other budget options you're looking at right now, I've seen them from $280 up to $400. So is it worth it? It depends on what you're shooting. You know, if you want really wide landscapes and you don't need that low light aperture, I would say no. If you shoot mainly indoor and you want a budget option, then yeah, this is great. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed my information. I hope it was very helpful. If you want, go ahead, like this and subscribe. That'll help me out, but no pressure. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.